Hello and welcome to the Reason Roundtable, the podcast of free minds, free markets, and free takes. On today's episode, we're going to talk about Donald Trump versus the rule of law, the new congressional budget plan, same as the old congressional budget plan, J.D. Vance goes to Europe, and so much more. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by my illustrious colleagues, Katherine Mangu-Ward and Nick Gillespie, as well as a very special guest, former Congressman Justin Amash. Welcome to the show. Everybody say hello.
Howdy.
Hey, everyone.
Hi. Happy Tuesday to everybody except America's presidents. You got your day. Sadly for this country, but happily for this podcast, the ranks of America's presidents do not include Justin Amash. Justin, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show. I wanted to introduce you briefly to the Reason Roundtable audience, and I realized there's actually too much to say. I didn't know where to start. So I asked ChatGPT to write an introduction for you. And here's what it said. I just want to run this by you. Justin Amash, I can't do a robot voice. Justin Amash is a prominent advocate for limited government, individual liberty, and strict constitutionalism. He's known for his principled independence in American politics. Serving in Congress from 2011 to 2021, he consistently challenged government overreach, opposed warrantless surveillance, and fought against excessive spending, often breaking with both major parties. His departure from the GOP in 2019 over concerns about executive power and due process cemented his reputation as a rare politician willing to put principle over party, and since leaving office, he has continued to champion libertarian ideas, criticizing authoritarian tendencies in both political parties. Does that sound about right to you?
Well, I have a confession. I am ChatGPT.
Yeah. That's what he's been doing since he left office.
Right. What do you think I've been doing? So
he's been really busy.
They hired me to just answer all the questions that people ask.
So I assume that's an endorsement of everything ChatGPT said about you.
And everything ChatGPT says.
I think it sounded pretty good.
Is there anything else you want to tell us about what you've been doing recently?
Well, I've been lifting weights.
Sure. Me too.
So, I just
also same.
I just moved from the bulking phase to the cutting phase, and so.
Oh no! So he's going to be grumpy on this podcast.
I've been hungry for the past couple weeks.
Why are you cutting? Why do you need to get shredded, Justin?
Well, I think if you want to succeed in politics, you'd better get shredded. That's the way I look at it.
Sure.
It doesn't hurt to look good while you're working at this job.
If I understand what DOGE is doing correctly, the American government has also moved recently from the bulking to the cutting phase, and that's what we're going to talk about here.
Good transition.
After we get a word from a sponsor. Hey, Reason Roundtable listeners. Peter Suderman here. Are you a student looking for a transformative opportunity that supports the foundations of a free society? Reliance College invites students aged 16 to 24 to the 2025 Great Connection Seminar in Chicago from July 26th to August 2nd. This year's theme, Reason and Free Will, dives into timeless ideas from writers such as Thomas Jefferson, Ayn Rand, and Aristotle. Students sharpen critical thinking in small dynamic groups, developing the intellectual tools needed to thrive in a free society. Outside the classroom, they'll explore Chicago's vibrant culture, touring museums, trying improv, building lifelong connections. Parents, this program equips students to think, reason, and act independently. Go to reliancecollege.org/reason to learn more and apply. Early registration is just $400 before March 1st. That includes room and board with scholarships available. Don't miss out. Visit reliancecollege.org/reason to learn more and apply. That's reliancecollege.org/reason. So the question of the week is President Donald Trump saving the country, or is he undermining the rule of law? On last week's episode, we talked about the legal challenges facing DOGE, Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. Musk says DOGE's mission is to cut wasteful spending and reduce the power of the bureaucracy. It's a mission that I think it's fair to say just about everybody on this podcast supports, at least in broad strokes. But under the Constitution, only Congress has the power of the purse. And there are real questions about the constitutionality of some of what DOGE is doing. It seems pretty clear, however, that some people just don't care. In the comments section of this podcast, for example, I encountered people saying, "Why are you guys so negative?" We got letters asking, "Can't we just take the win?" One of the people who seems not to care is President Donald Trump himself. Over the weekend, he posted on X, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." Justin Amash. You, according to ChatGPT, are a critic of both parties and a defender of kind of core constitutional ideas. Trump seems to be arguing here that the ends justify the means, that the president is above the law, at least so long as what he's doing is good. How do you respond to that?
I think everyone knows I don't agree with that. I don't agree that the president is above the law. I've heard a lot of the defenders of this quote, and he's attempting to quote Napoleon, I think. And it's a kind of thing that
I saw that movie.
Trump, I think this kind of thing that Trump likes to do. And I heard a lot of his defenders saying, well, of course, you shouldn't comply with unjust laws and all that kind of thing. And if a law is unjust, then it's not a real law. But that's not what the quote is really saying. The quote is saying that you don't violate a law. For those who say you should protest unjust laws and all the rest, what they're saying is if something is unjust, you should accept the consequences to send a message, to get things changed. He's saying here that essentially he's above the law. It's a very different thing. And so, I pointed out that this was basically the neoconservative mindset. It's been the mindset of a lot of different groups over the years, but the neoconservative mindset that I heard throughout Congress was, well, we have to pass this to save the country. We have to surveil everyone. We have to go to war in every country. It doesn't matter what the Constitution says. It doesn't matter what the limits are. And so that's just one example, the neoconservative mindset, but it's been the mindset of people throughout history who have wanted to abuse the system and take advantage for their own gain. And that's not to say that that something can't be used for good, but in the long run, you're out for despotism if you have this kind of system.
I thought your invocation of neoconservatism was really interesting when you were responding to this on Twitter or X or whatever we're supposed to call it now, because, your argument was this is what brought us the Patriot Act, the Forever War, endless surveillance, warrantless surveillance that is possibly unconstitutional, all of these kind of specific programs and, government actions that a lot of people in the MAGA world, a lot of Trump supporters do not like. And Trump has really defined himself as, yes, he's a Republican, and some people will say he is a conservative. I don't even know if Trump uses that word himself, but he's defined himself against Bush-era neoconservatism. You are arguing that there is a link here. Can you just draw that out for me a little bit? Because that is not a criticism that I see made of Trump very much.
Yeah, that's why I used those examples. I mean, I used it intentionally, and I got a lot of people in the comments and the replies saying, oh, this is not an apt comparison. What are you doing here? But it was used on purpose because I know that MAGA world is against neoconservatism, at least rhetorically. So I wanted to use it to show that the same principle that the president is espousing here, that he's essentially above the law doesn't apply to him if he's saving the country, is what neoconservatives used in the past and what people throughout history have used to abuse power and to harm lots of people and violate people's rights. So I just wanted to make that comparison. And let's not forget, by the way, this is another thing that is important to note. In Trump's first term, he reauthorized the Patriot Act. He reauthorized FISA 702. He continued the Forever War. No war was ended. The bombings in the Middle East and throughout the world continued, and he continued indefinite detention of Americans without charge or trial. All these policies remained while President Trump was in office in his first term. So for those who say oh, well, don't blame President Trump for this stuff, it's, neocons of the past, I worry, again, as I pointed out to them, that the same kind of philosophy can apply to people who brand themselves in different ways, and you can get the same kinds of results.
Yeah, those aren't neoconservative policies anymore to the extent that they exist under Republican administrations. Those are now Trumpian MAGA policies. Nick, I want to ask you just generally here, you've been away for a couple of weeks, so nice to have you back. Before you left, you said that you were cautiously optimistic about Donald Trump's presidency, about his second term. How is your cautious optimism holding up now?
Well, the drugs have worn off, so everything's a little more muted, but... no, I'm still, that tweet in particular was, a classic Trump rage bait. And it is offensive and disturbing for all sorts of reasons. I was looking up other, it's odd. Like if whenever an American leader is quoting Napoleon Bonaparte. Something has gone wrong to begin with. But another Bonaparte quote, which is worth thinking about, is that the greatest danger occurs at the moment of victory. And what we might, what I think all of us should be worried about, particularly MAGA people, is whether or not Trump and Elon and the whole operation is going to start going down weird rabbit holes where they destroy the base that they have for certain broad missions, that I think everybody is getting behind. And before we talk about, I know we're going to talk about the GOP budget plan, which is a great example of how shitty things are likely to become. We should also recognize directionally things are going in a better direction than they would be if Kamala Harris had won. And I find many of the things that the Trump administration is doing to be pointless and stupid, and really like these are minor things of, like taking off, an extra cherry on top of a sundae or something, as opposed to going for the real problems that are at core. But you asked me, am I cautiously optimistic? Yeah, I still am. For all of the rotten things that might be going on, we're having a vastly different conversation than we were even 6 months ago. And that conversation is about cutting the size, scope, and spending of government. And this is where I think libertarians really can make a difference, because MAGA people are going to follow Trump. The state, that's him. Whatever he does, they will define themselves as such. I think it's up to principled libertarians to start talking about that isn't cutting government spending. It is not cutting government regulation. It is not cutting the ability of one group of people to tell other people how to live. So still cautiously optimistic.
So many of these $50 million programs that Trump is discovering, I mean, you compared them to cherries on a sundae. I think of them more like peanuts, like a single peanut in a peanut buster parfait. Like, it's still a peanut buster parfait. Katherine, you edit a libertarian magazine that has long advocated for cuts to government spending, for reducing the power of the federal bureaucracy. You also love rockets, and you've praised Elon Musk repeatedly on this podcast for his accomplishments with SpaceX. There's that old saying, be careful what you wish for, right? Like you wish that you find a genie and you're like, oh, I'm going to wish for the thing I want most in the world. And then you get it and it's not exactly what you thought. Do you sometimes feel these days like maybe you told a genie that you wished Elon Musk would be put in charge of government spending and it turned out the genie was like very evil and devious?
Yes, absolutely. I feel like in my like airiest daydreams at some point I had the thought like, what if Elon Musk was in charge? And then I like fell asleep and forgot about it. And like, yes, a genie heard me and now I am cursed with the fulfillment of my wishes. Musk tweeted in response to the rule of law tweet from Trump, like 10 American flags. And that's not what I was hoping for, to be quite honest, in my fondest dreams. I am struggling with the fact that like this is a little fun. It's pretty fun. It's pretty fun to just watch Elon Musk running around being like, all your database belong to us. Like he's just out here doing stuff that people did not previously dare to do. The fact that there's like low key ongoing baby mama drama just like happening as like a bare undercurrent to all of this is outstanding.
It really is like you personally are scripting all of this. It's
delightful. However, the thing that I want even more than a sort of chaotic and entertaining political scene is for this to work. I would like it to work. I would like for government to be smaller at the end of this process. And as of right now, I just don't have a lot of faith that that's what's going to happen. I think that, and I've said this before, we end up with a scenario that's similar to the first Trump term, which is to say, there's a very high unseen element to this. Like a lot of new regulations are not going to be promulgated. A lot of new spending probably will not happen that would have happened under Harris or even under a mainstream Republican. And that is good. And I like that. But in the meantime, like rule of law is like, it's like Tinkerbell. Like you have to clap if you believe. Like the way that we have rule of law is if everyone believes we have rule of law. It's not like, it's something that's subject only to enforcement actions by the courts or by the cooperation of law enforcement. or by the cooperation of elected officials. It has to be an ethos in the country. And I do think that, it's in Reason Foundation's mission statement is that we like the rule of law. And as much as that sometimes can hurt my little anarchist heart, until we get to my utopia, we do need to take that seriously.
Do you think, though, that any of these cuts could happen? And, I mean, this is for everybody, but especially Justin, because you worked at the place that supposedly is, writing the laws and whatnot. But like, can you get cuts if you say, okay, we're going to go through the rule of law and we're not going to use any executive actions to start slicing away parts of the budget that are under the White House's control?
I think you can, but you have to do it in the way that the Constitution intends. You have to do it in the way that the framers intended. You have to do it in the way that the House and Senate are supposed to work. And they don't work that way right now. So I understand why Trump is taking this approach. I don't agree with the general approach of just ignoring Congress. I understand why he's doing it, because it's the easy way, but it's not robust. It's not sustainable. It doesn't hold up under scrutiny. You're going to have all sorts of court cases, legal challenges. A lot of this stuff is going to get reversed. At the end of the day, who knows how much of this actually ends up happening in reality? What you have to do if you want to change the system is you have to persuade Congress. There's no getting around that. Congress decides appropriations. Congress decides the spending. It's not decided by Elon Musk, as much as many of us might like him to decide spending decisions. I mean, we know that he can cut bloated organizations. We understand that. I like the energy he has. I like that he's tackling this and that DOGE is going after this aggressively. But unless they follow through and persuade Congress, and that's on the president in large part, that he has to be willing to veto things. He has to be willing to say, no, I'm not going to raise the debt ceiling. Unless the president is willing to put the pressure on Congress, none of this will last. And at the end of the day, what you end up with is an erosion of the rule of law. And the next administration, which could be Democrats again, who knows? You could end up with a Democratic administration. You could end up with a very left-wing administration even. You just don't know how these things keep swinging back and forth from Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump, and who knows what the next person's going to be. So if you create a precedent that all of this stuff is whatever the president wants to do, the president can do, then you're setting us up for a very dangerous future. And for those of us who care about liberty, for those of us who are libertarians, this is not the way to do it. We're never going to win in an anything goes system. Honestly, like if you say the person in charge can do whatever they want, that is not a win for libertarians.
They're not going to do what we want.
They're not doing what the libertarians want. I can assure you of that. Populism is going to win 10 out of 10 times in a system where you've got the person at the top. A lot of the people in these kinds of dictatorships, they end up there through populism. It starts with this kind of rhetoric. You're doing what the people want. People think that these dictators just rose to power. No, they did what the people want. And so I'm not suggesting that the current administration is dictatorial. I'm just saying that you are setting us up for potentially a future where you have a more authoritarian type of system. And that is very bad for Americans.
And there are two different bills, right, that are out there right now that could move power quite significantly on this token, right? So we have, I guess it's Mike Lee's bill, who would grant general statutory authority to reorganize the executive branch to the president. And that would make some of what DOGE is doing more legitimate. It would still be subject to like a fast track type vote, I think. So Congress retains, a final veto power on that. The other option is the Rand Paul version, right? Which is the legislative could reclaim its authority over the bureaucracy. And that would work too. But both of these paths still require Congress to do something, to do anything, to like give a shit in a way that I just am not sure Congress is willing to do right now.
Or they require the executive to simply ask Congress, hey, we want to do this. We want to cut this spending, or I should say, we want to not spend this money. And instead of just doing it entirely through executive power, through impoundment, you just create a rescission bill. You send it back to Congress. There are people out there suggesting that this can be done through a privileged vote, so it just requires a simple majority. Republicans are a majority in both houses of Congress. This is a possibility. But let's transition just a little bit here and talk about Congress, because a lot of the concern about DOGE and Trump amounts to, as we've been talking about, look, these things that they are doing might be good. But they need to do it through Congress. They need to pass legislation if they are going to cut government in a robust way. Well, Congress is, in fact, working on passing some legislation right now. That's right. There's another big budget bill in the works, and it would increase the debt by $3 to $4 trillion. Justin Amash, when you were in Congress, you were, as I think ChatGPT told us, you were an outspoken critic of the budget process. Can you talk us through some of the criticisms of the process? Explain how they apply to what's going on in Congress right now.
Well, my overall criticism is that it's smoke and mirrors. Okay, they're going to tell you that they are cutting spending by $2 trillion. And they love to talk about that. And it's all just on paper. It doesn't actually mean anything, because what matters is what Congress does this year. It doesn't matter that Congress promised you that 7 years down the road, some other president and some other Congress is going to follow this plan that we set up today. That doesn't mean anything. That other president and other Congress is not going to follow your plan. So what matters is, what can you do today to reform government? And if you're talking about the biggest drivers of spending in government, you're talking about the biggest programs, of course. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and defense spending. And if you don't address those in any sort of way, you're not going to actually address the budget problem. So my issue is, they are talking about this stuff like it's a real thing. It's imaginary. What matters is, what do they do this year? And I don't think they really have the appetite. I've been looking at the posts of my friend Thomas Massey, and he's been saying, look, I don't think these people have the appetite to do this. He's there. I talked to another colleague recently on the phone who's over there and says, hey, I'm thinking about just getting out of here because this is such a mess. They're not going to follow through on what's going on. Trump and Musk are saying, let's cut this, let's cut that. Especially Musk, I think, is the driver behind this more than Trump. And the members of Congress aren't really going to take advantage of that moment. And if they're not going to press forward, then what's the point of any of it?
Yeah, I think that's right. So, Nick, put the current House budget process mess in the context of what DOGE is trying to do. I mean, so Elon Musk is out there tweeting 100 times a day about all of this waste and fraud that he is saying that he has found for the very first time in the budget. And so many of these numbers seem really big. $50 million for condom bombs in Gaza, except wait, it's actually a program for a different country.
And it's mostly it's Gaza, Michigan, or something like that, right?
Somewhere else.
That's a Justin Amash question.
Yeah, but
it was not the Gaza in the Middle East. Let's put it that way.
That's the point.
So let's help me think through. On the one hand, Elon Musk is making a real effort to at least redirect the conversation to government waste, fraud, abuse, overstaffing in the agencies, the incredible power of the regulatory agencies. On the other hand, Republicans in Congress look like they are about to expand the federal budget, the debt, the deficit by trillions more.
Yeah.
What do we make of that?
One of the good things that Musk has said at a recent Tesla investors meeting, he went through a not fully accurate reading of Milton Friedman's axiom that the burden of government is what it spends, not what it taxes or regulates or anything. And he said we have to cut government spending, that there's no way around it. He's actually sharpening that for, not long ago in front of Donald Trump, he said, we can cut $1 trillion in spending, and that'll really net out to like $2 trillion in savings because of blah, blah, blah. He's now just saying we need to cut government spending. I think this is where you're going to start to see a separation between Trump and Musk, partly because in the end, the way the Republican Party maintains power and gets into power is by spending more on favored constituencies. And when you look at the GOP budget blueprint, it promises, a lot of cuts over the long haul in things like Medicaid, student loans, SNAP benefits, food stamps, and adding more money in order to increase defense spending and immigration, deportations. What is it going to be next year? And that's the real question, because it's easy to say we're going to cut a bunch of things that we think our voters don't care about. Our voters are not on Medicaid. Our voters are not getting student loans. Our voters are not getting food stamps. They're flinching already. And Donald Trump was never a small budget guy. He never wanted to spend less money. I think this is where Musk, this is what he is doing that is vitally good, which is that when he calls out, often in error, the amount of mispayments that are being made, he is at least facilitating a conversation on Twitter, at the very least, about, my God, there is so much stuff out there. People no longer in the government have no idea what they're talking about. When I've been thinking about this story I remember reading in the 1980s about the Vatican, when they did an audit. And it turned out that at some point in the 1980s, the Vatican actually owned condom factories. Everyth's about condoms. But the point was that the Vatican
Did they cut the spending on that?
Well, they sold it off, but it was so vast and, complicated that the Vatican really did not know what it was doing. It had so many holdings in so many different things. The federal government is like that. And so it's good that we're learning about the specifics of what USAID did, even if many of the particular claims are wrong. And, it would be better to be correct than not incorrect, about Social Security payments, things like that. But I think what you're seeing is the beginning of the end of the alliance between Musk and Trump, because the Republican Party, including Donald Trump, want to spend more money. And that is not what DOGE is kind of pushing at this moment in time.
I do wonder, the counterfactual to think about here, and we have some tools to answer this question, is what does the second Trump administration without Elon Musk look like? Right? I mean, he's still pardoning or calling off the DOJ on Adams. He's still, out just whatever is happening in Europe right now, which I think we might talk about later. He's still, doing a bunch of the more signature Trumpian things that he said he would do. But I think people would be focused more on those things in a way that maybe would be helpful or maybe would not be. And instead, so much of the energy of coverage around Trump and so much of the energy of kind of assessing Trump has to do with the flurry that Musk has caused. And I think
it's not a flurry, it's a peanut butter parfait.
Stop
I don't know
saying
what it's
that.
Always
Amash is cutting. Don't be so mean. Stop saying the words peanut butter parfait.
There's protein. It's peanuts.
My middle-aged lady internet tells me that I can't eat peanut butter to get my protein, that it's actually a bad source of protein, and I'm really mad about that.
Yeah,
I was ready to go on an all peanut butter diet.
That's maha, right? Which is another thing we haven't talked about. And
that's true.
And which is a frightening apparition on the horizon.
For sure, there is a vision of the second Trump administration that is minus Musk and maybe minus Kennedy, that is a profoundly different, less weird, less good net ? Administration. I don't know.
So one possibility is that there would still be some emphasis on reducing federal employment and cutting spending through the executive. But instead of going through DOGE and Elon Musk, it would go through the White House Budget Office and OMB Director Russ Vought. And so that brings us to our next topic. Speaking of budget messes and constitutional blunders, I want to talk about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is the agency created via the inspiration of Elizabeth Warren, sort of by her, sort of not, under Barack Obama. White House Budget Chief Russ Vought announced last week that he was effectively defunding the agency by seeking zero. That is a big old goose egg. $0 to fund it. And in this case, there are no serious constitutional or procedural concerns whatsoever. Katherine, I actually want to start with you here. Why is that? Just give us explain why it is that this is not a problem in any way from a constitutional perspective.
Listen, I want to start by saying I love everything that Reason publishes and produces equally. I love all my children the same.
I sense a but coming.
But my favorite article that we published last week is Eric Boehm writing about the CFPB. The headline is Elizabeth Warren's hubris allowed Trump to defund the CFPB. And the entire piece is structured around the metaphor of when Achilles' mother dips him in the river Styx in order to make him invulnerable to harm. But of course, she's holding him by his heel. Thus, the famous Achilles heel is born. And he says, Elizabeth Warren is Thetis. Elizabeth Warren is Achilles' mother. She, in the birthing and building of this of the CFPB, left this tragic flaw, this weakness, which is that it has to be funded in this somewhat unusual way by the executive, and the executive can simply put in a funding request of zero, as Trump has done. This is Elizabeth Warren's hubris, a Greek word for chosen on purpose, has led us to this place. All Reason articles should actually be structured on mythic archetypes, and that is what we will be doing going forward. But it is very, very on point here, and she is experiencing the same thing that I am. She wished for. She made all of her wishes, and now she's getting what she wished for, and it sucks.
Wait, you and Elizabeth Warren go to the same genie?
We do. We go to the same genie. I mean, honestly, Elizabeth Warren and I have a lot more in common temperamentally than I would like to admit. We're doing different. We have different goals, but are we not the same gal on some
very
level?
much
Constantly talking about your Indian heritage.
I am. I will not shut up about my 476th Cherokee or whatever she is.
Justin, you were in Congress while there were a lot of debates about the CFPB and while it was doing a lot of the work that it was doing. What did you learn about that agency during your time in Congress?
Well, I learned that it's not necessary. It's harmful, like a lot of things in government. And this goes to another point about what Trump and Musk are doing. I really wish that Trump would make the case, and he's got to have people prep him on this and explain it to him, and because I don't think this is, where he's at his strongest. But I wish that they would make the case that a lot of the things that they want to eliminate are unconstitutional. And if you make the case that things are unconstitutional, I do think that the executive can make the strong argument, I'm not going to execute these programs. They are not authorized under our Constitution. Now, you'll still get legal challenges, but I believe you're on much stronger ground in these legal challenges if you make a constitutional case for why a program or an entire department is not constitutional. Let it go to the Supreme Court and let's have this real debate. Instead, what they seem to be doing too often is, oh, we just don't like this thing. It's bad on policy grounds. That's why I'm against it. We just want to impose our own policy vision on the country. And when you're talking about imposing your own policy vision, you're on much weaker ground. You have much worse standing. You have to go and make the constitutional case against these things. And I do wish they would do that.
So the CFPB was challenged as unconstitutional. This did go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, it's a little bit complicated, but they basically signed off on it. They said this agency in this structure where the funding comes through the Treasury, that in fact, in this case, Congress kind of can give up its power of the purse. Do you think that President Trump or any Republican, any president who wanted to get rid of the CFPB could still kind of make that constitutional arguments even after the Supreme Court has weighed in?
Yeah, I think you have to go there. You have to make another argument. You're presenting it to the court again. They can change their mind. Precedent can be overturned. We've seen this already with this court where they're willing to overturn something like Roe v. Wade and say, okay, that's no longer the law. And so I would make the case again. I would get the best legal minds together to make the best constitutional argument against the CFPB and other executive departments.
If I can, I just want to say, I think the attack on CFPB is great. There are procedural issues that, need to be attended to and all of that kind of stuff. But one of the things, and this is the power of the current Trump administration's kind of offensive, which is that it's forcing people to justify what they do. CFPB has not been around that long. How did we get by without it? Something you can say something similar about the Department of Education, which would require more legislation and things like that. But it's like, somehow we managed to get through, United States history without a Department of Education until 1979, et cetera. And like, this is where we know we're in a major shift, a major, vibe shift or whatever you want to call it. When you start talking to people and say, okay, we're getting rid of that, defend it. And if your first answer is, well, it's always been this way, or it's been this way for a long time, or it's like, I get my paycheck from this. This is what happened with the attacks on gay marriage. Ultimately, people who were trying to defend, a legal marriage as it's always been one man and one woman, it turned out to be a pretty weak argument. And I think that's what we're witnessing here now. And I think it's good. And I'm happy to see it, even as I worry about some of the outcomes and things like that. And again, I think what's missing from the current moment is this libertarian underpinning, which is about principles, not outcomes. And, this is the rule of law. Like, we need to live in a society where people will accept to live by an outcome that might not go their way. We know Trump won't do that. He's a terrible messenger for that, but he's giving us an opening to kind of really peel back a lot of useless government actions and spending and things like that, because the people defending them are only saying, look, it's always been this way.
Yeah. So, I think you're just absolutely right to point to the rule of law as what matters here. And there's a real irony in looking at the CFPB story happening right now in the context of DOGE and all of the complaints about kind of procedural screwiness and lack of concern for the kind of core constitutional issues. Because the Achilles heel, the big flaw with the CFPB was that Elizabeth Warren wanted to make sure that it was invulnerable, that people couldn't defund it or get rid of it. And so she created a mechanism for funding it that was at least constitutionally dubious. It was tied up in court for a decade or so, and there were real concerns to the point where, like I said, it went to the Supreme Court. And by going around the Constitution and by not following it to the letter, she made her own agency, her own project, her own baby in government. She made it vulnerable to attack from the other side. And this goes to the point that Justin was making earlier, that the reason you do this stuff is because you want it to be robust and enduring. You follow the law, you follow the Constitution, because that's how you make change happen. So we've got a listener question here. No, go ahead.
Now I just want to add, this is the arrogance of politicians that is at work. They always assume that they will be the ones in power. So when you see Trump doing the things he's doing, there's this weird assumption that he's going to be in power forever. And maybe some people think that he will. But there's this weird assumption that he's going to be there forever, and he's going to be able to control the executive branch, or Republicans at the very least will continue to control the executive branch. And they never think about the other side being in control. And whenever you're working on anything in government, you should always think about your enemies being in charge of the apparatus. And what kind of system do you want if the people who are completely against you are in control at the highest levels? They have the White House, or they have the Senate, or they have the House. You need to think about those things. And I don't think members of Congress think about that stuff because they're too arrogant or aloof, or just don't care enough about the system.
All right. Speaking of the system and what presidents are doing and allowed to do, we have a listener question. It comes from James. who writes, watching Trump deploy tariffs against Canada, Mexico, Colombia, etc., as a way of applying pressure, incentivizing them to act in his interest on non-economic topics, for example, immigration, border security, has got me wondering whether Trump actually views tariffs as a negotiating tool rather than an economic lever. I know people in his camp have been saying he'll use them to offset tax cuts, but the evidence, as I see it, suggests that Trump cares very little about balancing the budget and cares a great deal about negotiating and deal-making. Is that the real reason he's so passionate about tariffs? Would love to hear the panel discuss. Nick, let's start with you. Is Trump using tariffs primarily as a negotiating tool, or is there something more going on?
No, I think he is not using it as a negotiating tool. He loves tariffs. He has said publicly multiple times, I think that tariff is the most beautiful word in the dictionary. He has called himself an unabashed tariff man. Whatever that is, that's like the shittiest Marvel superhero of all time, I would suspect. There's not a multiverse that would make that a good policy. And in his first term in 2018 and 2019, he levied major tariffs that on almost $400 billion worth of goods. Which, among other things, inspired a retaliation by the Chinese against American soybeans. They have been the biggest consumer of American soybeans. We have not recovered, or U.S. soybean producers have not recovered from losing that market share in China, which then went elsewhere. I did a long interview with Doug Irwin, the trade economist, about all of this kind of stuff. But Trump he likes to negotiate, he likes to deal, but he loves tariffs, and he is going to impose them. This is not merely a negotiating tactic.
Justin, Trump did say he was imposing tariffs on Canada and Mexico and then pulled back pretty quickly, although some of that has gone back into effect with steel. How do you understand Trump's the appeal of tariffs to President Trump?
Well, I don't understand the appeal, but I also have been baffled over the years. I've really tried to figure out whether he doesn't understand the economic impact of tariffs, or he doesn't care, or he's pretending not to understand. I really don't know. And to this day, his actions don't help me get a good grasp as to whether he does understand or doesn't understand. For example, he's threatened a lot of tariffs, but he continues to suspend things. He was going to put tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Then he's like, no, we'll suspend them. And then he talks about these reciprocal tariffs, and he says, oh, but we're going to do a study. And to me, anytime someone says they're doing a study, it means they don't really want to do the thing. They're trying to push it back. They're trying to hold off. They want to say they did it so that people will, get excited back home, but they don't really want to do the thing. So it's not clear to me what he thinks about them from an economic standpoint, whether he believes in them and then he has advisors who are pushing back and getting him to question them. And then as for the negotiating tool, I would say, okay, using them as a negotiating tool might be what he's trying to do. But then again, if you're using them as a negotiating tool, then you can't do this thing where you put them on and then you take them off the next day and say, oh, we're going to pause them for a month. Because then people start to call your bluff on it. You have to actually do it. So it's not really a very good negotiating tool if everyone thinks you're just going to wait and suspend and stop and pause and do studies. You got to do it or not do it. So I really don't know where he's at on tariffs. I know that he loves tariffs in the sense that he loves talking about them. He says they're the greatest things. He says he's a tariff man, all the rest. But I really don't know what his whole game is with them.
Katherine, how do you answer this question? And you cannot respond. I'm just going to do a study.
I think that I'm going to respond with another peanut butter themed answer. I think it's like peanut butter and chocolate. It's two great tastes that go great together. It can both be a negotiating tactic and a good unto itself in Trump's eyes. I think.
Wait, Trump's tariffs are Reese's Cups?
Trump's tariffs are Reese's Cups. Objectively the worst Halloween candy, by the way. Fight me.
Wow.
Wow,
it's objectively the best Halloween candy.
Here's the thing. I do think I agree. There's a fundamental mystery at the heart of Trump's relationship to tariffs, which is I think he has said many times that words that indicate that he does not understand what a trade deficit is. And I think that's the heart of it. He does not understand the distinction between like budget deficit and trade deficit as two just almost unrelated concepts, frankly.
Would you say that he has a conceptual deficit?
I would
But
not say that.
is it really possible that he doesn't understand it?
I don't know.
I think so.
I think the human
People
mind
stop
is a
growing.
marvel of choosing not to know inconvenient things. And I think that he has chosen not to know that.
But he works in
some way.
business. He works in business and must experience trade deficits of some sort all the time. Like when you go to the grocery store,
He does not
you
perceive
have a
them in
trade
that way.
deficit with the grocery store.
I
Like,
don't think
I-
Donald Trump goes
I-
to the grocery store.
Okay. I
you're
shop
right.
I shop at the grocery store. They're not shopping at my house.
Right.
I have a trade deficit with them. I mean, this
Yes.
is the whole way the world works, and you think that someone in business would understand that. That's why I still give him the benefit of the doubt that maybe he does understand it and is just playing a game. I don't know. I don't know what's going on here.
I thought you were giving him the benefit of the doubt that he's just not very smart.
So I think his administration.
I think he is bright. I think he doesn't have a lot of knowledge about a lot of what goes on in government, for example. But I think he's actually, in terms of intelligence, I think he's bright.
I think there are a couple of sort of things that I would bring to bear to answer this question. One is that Donald Trump has been incredibly inconsistent on policy for decades. But the one thing that he has been most consistent about is that he loves tariffs and he thinks they're good. That tells you something. Number two, even if Donald Trump doesn't fully understand the costs of tariffs, his administration has to understand them because they paid farmers. There was a bailout last time because farmers were hurting under Donald Trump's tariff and trade policies. There was a real cost. I think Donald Trump in his head probably just thinks, well, that's sort of a minor cost of doing business, of doing tariffs, which I love because I love tariffs. I just love tariffs. I also think he loves negotiating. I think our listener question is correct in some ways. He clearly thinks of himself as a deal maker. He has this self-image that he has projected and then sort of turned back on himself. He just views himself as a deal maker and thinks that using tariffs is a good way to go ahead and make deals. I think the big thing that he doesn't understand, yes, it's that he doesn't get trade deficits, but he doesn't understand economic uncertainty. And this is the thing that really worries me about Donald Trump's threatened tariffs, is that even if they don't go into effect, or they go into effect for just a little while and then he reverses them, there is going to be so much uncertainty in the economy in a world where tariffs could be going on and off at any time, where you can't even figure out, okay, this is going to be the cost of importing goods or moving stuff back and forth over the border between the United States and Canada several times because that's your production process. When you have that uncertainty, it is incredibly destructive to making plans and to economic activity. And that's the thing that I think Donald Trump is underrating here. Anyway, good question. Thank you so much for that. A reminder, we love to answer your questions. Please submit yours. Send your short, succinct, pithy, and otherwise not very long questions to podcasts@reason.com. That's podcasts@reason.com. Okay, let's stop talking about Donald Trump for just a little bit, and instead we're going to talk about J.D. Vance. Over the weekend, Vice President J.D. Vance went to the Munich Security Conference in Germany, and he gave a speech, the key line of which I want to read you. The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. What I worry about is the threat from within. The retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values shared with the United States. So this then generated a whole lot of discussion and discourse about Europe's bureaucratic economy, about how Europe is sort of falling behind the United States economy, about lack of free speech, especially in Germany. But also folks saying, wait a minute, what about Russia, which just invaded a European country, like with tanks? So Justin Amash, what did you think of J.D. Vance's speech and his claim that the biggest threat to Europe isn't Russia, but European overregulation and sort of differing cultural values?
Well, I think he's right in a certain sense, right? Okay, we can talk about wars, and wars present some kind of immediate threat, of course, but in terms of how your country is going to operate, in the long run, whether it's the United States or any other country, the internal threats are really the biggest. It's how do you handle yourselves as a people, and the thing where I would disagree with him is I don't think Europe has ever been really good on free speech. The United States has a very unique history in terms of the way we protect people's rights. And the strength of our First Amendment is incredible, and there's nothing like it anywhere in the world. And I would say the same thing about the Second Amendment and other aspects of our Constitution and the way we govern. There are a lot of people who, especially on the libertarian side, who will criticize the U.S. as being, authoritarian, and it's gone completely astray, and our Constitution's not worth anything, they'll say. But the truth is, whether our Constitution has worked perfectly or not, and it certainly has not worked perfectly to restrain government. I mean, in many respects, it has let government grow completely out of control. But on the other hand, I think it has protected our country in ways that are almost inconceivable. I mean, we take it for granted that we have such a robust First Amendment protection here. And Europe has never been very good at this. And I think that he's right that the threat to Europe in the long run is this sort of illiberalism, in the sense of the people being controlled by the government, being told what they can say, what they can think. That leads to a significant deterioration over time, and there's no recovering from that. And that's on top of the social welfare state that they have there and all the other problems. I do think that Europe is in a lot of trouble, and it's internal trouble. It's not so much external trouble.
There's that meme that you always see whenever this sort of thing happens, like the European mind cannot comprehend, and then it's always like a washer and dryer. Like that works, something like that. But this is also true about free speech. I mean, and I think anybody who has had sort of any kind of experience talking to people who grew up in Europe, they just cannot grok the concept of free speech as it exists in the United States. And this is a divide that I think gets remarked upon every now and then, but people need to understand, like, they don't have it. And it's not just that they don't have it, it's that they don't understand it.
But I think that's a secondary, if not tertiary, reason for the EU's malaise is because of economic regulation. And that filters into other things. But we've talked about this in the past. If you go back to 1995 or even 2000, the EU's economic output and the U.S. economic output was about the same. Now it's less than half of what the U.S. produces on an annual basis. That is fundamentally and almost completely because of terrible economic regulation, where they are constantly looking at the worst case scenarios. They're getting out in front of every new technology and every new business innovation in order to kind of throttle and strangle their economy. I think you take that away and things change very differently. As Justin was saying, Europe has always been terrible on free speech and free expression, certainly relative to the U.S. It's probably worse now than it was 25 years ago. But I think the main problem is that the EU thinks that it can maintain everything the same way, the same standard of living, the same social welfare benefits. They shovel money at people to have kids. France is a great place to have kids. You get all kind of freebies. People aren't doing it. And the reason for that is because the economic output and the economic prospects in Europe are terrible. But they can't absorb immigrants, and they've never been good at immigration, but they need newcomers, but they can't, they'll let them in and then they give them money and don't let them work and don't let them assimilate. That's a spiral. Having said that, I do want to point out that Vance is like kind of waving away the idea that, Russia invading a sovereign nation is like BFD. That's problematic in a different way. Not that the U.S. should be involved. And it's actually good, like, that he, what Trump did the first time around and is doing again is saying to Europe, like, you've got your corner of the world. Make sure you keep it neat and clean. You're not going to get a blank check from the U.S., which is also, I think, a positive sign.
I also think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. I just wanted to add. I mean, it's connected to Nick's point that all of this stuff is connected. The economics is connected to free speech, and it's connected to the culture in the sense that in America we believe in risk taking. We believe that people can fail and get up from that failure and try again. We believe that people should be criticized, that they should feel pressure from the outside. They should take on challenges. And a lot of what happens in Europe is protecting the people from themselves. Oh, we don't want someone to hurt your feelings. Oh, we don't want you to feel like a failure. Oh, we don't want you to, and it's one thing after another. And that leads to economic melees where you don't really have a vibrant economy because it's not diverse. People aren't trying new things. They're afraid to fail. They're afraid of being insulted. They're afraid of having their feelings hurt. It's all connected.
Vance, we should also remember, is a guy with a beard and a blog, right? He came up like online. He's a poster, and he was trolling to some extent, and that was a kind of masterful international trolling. I agree with some of it, not all of it. But Vance also gave another speech or some other remarks when he was in Europe that I want to ask you about, Katherine, because it goes to a concern that a lot of guys with beards and blogs have, which is artificial intelligence. And he said that excessive regulation of AI would kill a transformative industry just as it's taking off. And he positioned the United States as the place where pro-growth AI policies are going to enable this technology to become a potent tool for job creation, right? He's like, the United States gets AI, you don't. We have all the AI companies and technology. It's working here. Katherine, what did you think of what J.D. Vance had to say about AI and how it relates back to his sort of more general criticisms of Europe and what's going on there?
Yeah, I feel like I'm an honorary guy with a beard and a blog, and so I do identify with him in this way. So the thing is, Europe is not content, actually, to stay in its own corner and keep itself tidy. They want to regulate the world. And so that's what's happening with AI. That's what has happened with big tech for the last 15 years. That's what's happened with the charging cables on our phones and computers. The EU is trying to use the size of its market, or Europe more broadly is trying to use the size of its market to tell companies that would like to operate in that market how they can behave everywhere in the world. And I'm sympathetic to the you are not the boss of me. You are not my real dad, Europe. I don't have to listen to you. And, we fought a war for that. God damn it. And I think that that's healthy, and that's useful for the United States to remember that we are economically dominant for the reasons that we just discussed here, and that we should not make the compromise that Europe has made, I think, greatly to its detriment, to say maybe this is enough growth. Maybe we have enough. That is wrong-headed in 14 different ways, and we should not go along to get along. We should fight them on that stuff.
Truly, it is a brave new world, and that is a preview of my cultural recommendation, which we'll get to in a little bit. Nick, I want to start with you on our final segment here. What have you been watching, reading, listening to, otherwise consuming?
Yeah. I watched Winner, which is a docudrama about Reality Winner, the millennial whistleblower who was an NSA contractor, gave a document from the NSA or from her agency to The Intercept, which did an incredibly bad job of masking it. And so she was rounded up even more quickly than she would have been otherwise. But it's directed by Susanna Fogel. It was written by Kerry Howley, who worked at Reason for a long time and wrote a fantastic profile of Reality Winner for New York Magazine, and then more recently published a book called Bottoms Up and the Devil Laughs about a lot of things coming out of the Reality Winner case. What I like about this movie is that it is very funny, and it is also a great, just outrage-inducing reminder of all of the banal things that we took seriously during the global war on terror era, including prosecuting somebody and then putting her in jail, sentencing her to jail originally for 63 months. Somebody like Reality Winner, who gave a document which shouldn't have received classification in the first place, certainly not at a top or secret level of classification, and then got convicted and put in jail. She ended up taking a plea deal and serving several years in a federal penitentiary for something that should not have in any way, shape, or form been a crime. And I'll just point out, going back to our earlier conversations about Donald Trump and all of that, she was prosecuted under the Espionage Act, in Trump's first administration. It was a really awful case all along. This is a small piece of art that is a great and sardonic reminder of what happens when we start to get into a hysteria about where we got to shut down freedom of expression in the name of some greater good.
Haven't seen the movie yet, but that story is a case study in all of the neoconservative post 9/11 policy that Justin Amash was talking about earlier on this show. Justin, do you have a cultural recommendation for the Reason Roundtable listeners?
Yeah, first I want to say repeal the Espionage Act and pardon Reality Winner. So I watched the NBA All-Star game where my man, Cade Cunningham, was in his first NBA All-Star game. And what I want to say is they completely screwed up the format. They changed it from a normal game.
Were they playing golf or something?
They changed it from a normal game, just like an NBA game where you got the 4 quarters, 12 minutes. They changed it to this mini tournament where you have 4 teams playing up to 40. No clock, no overall clock, just each team plays up to 40. It's 3 teams of all-stars and then 1 team of just random rising stars who are not actual all-stars. They're just newbies to the league. And then the 3 teams of all-stars were divided in such a weird way where like you had the old timers playing on one team, you had the international players on another team, and then you had kind of like the relatively younger stars playing on another team. So it was completely mismatched and odd, and it wasn't very competitive. They did it because they thought they were going to make the game much more competitive. I miss the old days watching Michael Jordan, Isaiah Thomas, Magic Johnson, players who would actually go to the All-Star game and compete. And now
you are getting old. Old.
Now the players go to the game. They don't compete. They don't try. This did not make them try any harder. I know that they do get some kind of prize money for winning this tournament, but they really have to up the dollar amount or something. Like, maybe give each player a few $100,000 or something. I know that's a lot of money, but hey, they're putting this on TV. It's to entertain people at home. These are players who are already making millions and millions of dollars. You're going to have to up the incentives to get them to play hard. Otherwise, you just got to do away with it. This format this year did not fix the problem.
You mentioned Michael Jordan. That the whole setup reminded me. It was like something out of the Space Jam movie. It just seems so ridiculous and stupid. I was expecting, what was the name of the bad team, the Monstars or something, to be playing in the final. It was just a misfire, but fascinating that all of these old institutions, they're not just in politics, are falling apart. Like nobody cares about the NBA All-Star Game anymore, baseball or the Oscars or the Grammys. Like they're desperate and they're trying to reinvent themselves because whatever the old magic was, it seems to be gone.
And it used to be a big deal. Yeah.
That is a great transition, because you know what has screwed up the format and makes me miss the old days? The Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's a new Captain America movie in the movie theaters, and oh my goodness, it is a disaster. Just an absolute disaster. Captain America, Brave New World, supposedly the 4th Captain America movie. That's what it's billed as. But it's not really a Captain America movie. It's an Incredible Hulk movie. And very specifically, it is pretty much a direct sequel to the 17-year-old Incredible Hulk film from 2008 starring Edward Norton, who hasn't played, who the movie was so bad that like Edward Norton is no longer part of the cinematic universe. They recast that role, and Hulk has been played completely by a completely different actor for the last nearly 2 decades. And yet Marvel was like, you know what? We're having real trouble here. The movies are just not as successful as they were before the pandemic. Everything is kind of a mess. So let's go back and make a direct sequel to one of the least liked, least successful early experiments in the Marvel universe, and then tell people it's a Captain America movie. It's even worse than you think. This movie went through tons of reshoots, and you can tell. I mean, this thing just looks like it's been through like a wood chipper for the editing. It's just an absolute disaster on a story perspective. It's boring. It's not fun. Harrison Ford is in this movie as the president, and he turns into the Red Hulk at the end, and there is a fight in Washington, D.C. in front of the it's the flowers that we always have, like
cherry blossoms.
The cherry blossoms, like in the cherry blossom trees down by the water, like a spot I've run. There's this it should be this wonderful, amazing, like everything comes together in this sort of glorious sort of spy, Washington D.C. set thriller moment, and it's just flat out boring all the way through. It is forget being a bad movie, though. It is totally misconceived. The people running the Marvel Cinematic Universe do not understand what the appeal of the Marvel movies are. They don't understand the appeal of Captain America and what Captain America is supposed to be and what he stands for and what he is supposed to be doing, because he's not supposed to be the supporting player in his own movie. He's not supposed to be somebody who doesn't have any real conflicts, or like he's sort of this movie is about like, is this new Captain America? Can he really take the mantle of the old Captain America? And the answer is, yeah, sure. Anyway, it's terrible. It's boring, misconceived on every level.
I think it would be great if Ed Norton had to Hulk out in every movie that he's in, because that would have been a great scene in A Complete Unknown when he plays Pete Seeger, like when Bob Dylan goes electric, That might have saved that movie, too.
I would have watched that one. Catherine, What have you been watching? And please, if you have any comments on the NBA All-Star Game or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, now's the time.
I read a book, and the title feels somehow apropos for this podcast. It's called I Who Have Never Known Men. And it's supposed to be a dystopia.
Wait, aren't you an honorary beard and podcast guy?
It's supposed to be a dystopia, but it sounded pretty good right now. It's by Jacqueline Hartman, and it actually came to prominence on Book Talk. This is a Book Talk book. Book Talk tends to this is like gals recommending each other books on TikTok. They tend to like kind of like fantasy, fairy porn, that kind of thing. This is not that. This is a gorgeous, spare, translated from the French dystopia. It opens with 40 women imprisoned in a cage. They don't know why. They don't know how they got there. And it's just this long, beautiful meditation on freedom and what makes you human if you have nothing. And it's basically like if it was The Handmaid's Tale, but nothing was ever explained. You just live in this total vacuum of you don't know why the world is the way it is, and you just have to live in it. The main character just has to live in it. She doesn't have a name. She doesn't know her name. She's the child, the only young person in this world. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's weird. It's all the things that the NBA All-Star Game, Captain America, Brave New World are not, and I recommend it very, very highly if you want to be confusingly depressed, but also inspired. I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman.
Confusingly depressed is what I am after reading the news every day.
But also inspired.
Well, we're hoping. Nick, do you have any announcements, any events you want to promote?
On February 27th in New York City, I'm going to be sitting down for a live interview taping with Brian Doherty, who has a book coming out called Modern Libertarianism, which kind of gallops through the post-war era. It's a nice addendum and auxiliary and supplement to his Radicals for Capitalism book. But go to reason.com/events and come out and talk to Brian Doherty and drink some beer, wine, soda, and have what we call light fare. I don't know what that means really, but don't expect to get a full meal, but you can do okay.
It's like a county fair, except it doesn't weigh that much.
Yeah. We will have a butter sculpture of Barry Goldwater. So
Justin Amash will not be eating that. Okay, before that's our show.
Not
but
in his shredding phase. No.
Before we go, a couple of announcements here. Do you want to work for Reason? We are hiring. If you want to work with us, go to reason.com/jobs. That's reason.com/jobs. We have fellowships. We have internships. We're looking for writers and video producers and people who are good at making things happen. So go to reason.com/jobs and see if there's a job that's right for you. Finally, we want to say thanks and give a big shout out to some generous supporters. Daniel Garland, Neera Badwar, John Bills, Jeffrey Brand, Tori and Aaron Haberman, Matthew Chanel, Terrence Wolfe and Roberta Yuan, Richard Reynolds. Thanks so much for making this podcast and everything we do at Reason possible. As always, if you like this podcast, you can support us by going to reason.com/donate. That's reason.com/donate. Thank you so much for listening. Like Captain America, the Reason Roundtable will return.